You are watching World News Program, coming to you live from Algiers with me, Miriam Zian. The headlines. Dozens of Palestinians killed and wounded in new horrific Israeli massacres in Gaza. The occupation intercepts the last ship of the Sumud Flotilla and continues its abuses against international activists. In Morocco, public anger continues across several cities amid growing calls for the Prime Minister's resignation. The European Union urges all parties to maintain calm, while international human rights organizations condemn the Makhzen's crackdown on peaceful protesters. Next, in Sudan, resistance committees warn that Al-Fashir has become an open morgue bleeding from all sides. The army confirms carrying out airstrikes on rapid support forces positions in Yala, while a draft resolution before the UN Human Rights Council calls for a ceasefire. And Russia targets energy infrastructure in Ukraine in large-scale overnight attacks. The Russian Defense Ministry announces control over the town of Verbov, southeastern Ukraine, and Munich airport says it has resumed operations after being shut down due to drone sightings. Welcome back to the details of your nightly news. First, Hamas has announced that it accepts several aspects of U.S. President Donald Trump's proposed ceasefire plan aimed at ending nearly 2 years of war in Gaza, but says certain elements still require further negotiation. In a statement, the group confirmed its willingness to release all remaining hostages while emphasizing the need for continued talks on key points outlined in Trump's 220-point peace proposal.
The Islamic resistance movement Hamas values the Arab, Islamic, and international efforts, as well as the efforts of the U.S. President Donald Trump, which call for an end to the war in the Gaza Strip, prisoner exchange, the immediate entry of aid, and the rejection of the occupation of the Strip, and the forced displacement of our Palestinian people from it. In this context, and to achieve a ceasefire and the full withdrawal from the Strip, the movement announces its approval to release all occupation prisoners, both living and deceased, according to the exchange formula mentioned in President Trump's proposal, and contingent on providing the initial conditions for the exchange operation. In this regard, the movement affirms its readiness to immediately enter into negotiations through the intermediaries to discuss the details.
U.S. President Donald Trump ordered on Friday the Zionist entity to stop bombing the Gaza Strip after Hamas said it had accepted some elements of his plan, thanking all the countries that helped in the mediation efforts to put an end to the conflict. Earlier Friday, Trump gave Hamas until 6 p.m. Washington time to approve his plan on Sunday. In the same context, and following Hamas's decision, Qatar, Egypt, and the UN have welcomed the U.S. response to Hamas's response to U.S. President Donald Trump's Gaza plan, hailing it as an opportunity to reach a permanent ceasefire and to bring the tragic war in Gaza to an end. And still in the Palestinian file, many Palestinians were killed and others wounded by Israeli gunfire and airstrikes that targeted civilians in several areas of the Gaza Strip since dawn on Friday. Medical sources in Gaza hospitals reported that at least 72 people were killed, including 38 in Gaza City, and dozens more wounded in strikes and shelling that hit displaced and starving civilians across several areas of the Strip. And several Palestinians were killed and others wounded on Friday morning when Israeli forces targeted civilians in the Al-Sabra neighborhood southeast of Gaza City. An emergency services source said an Israeli airstrike hit Al-Maghribi street in Al-Sabra, killing 9 Palestinians and injuring others.
The massacres in the Gaza Strip are continuing until this moment. The Zionist occupation is intensifying its bombing in the Gaza Strip, and there is a clear concentration on Gaza City. They're targeting houses on the heads of their inhabitants, and they're killing people in masses. They're targeting everybody and everywhere. We're talking about entire families being wiped out from the civil registers. As you see behind me, there are bodies of a number of people from the same family. The children and the women are dying as a result of the bombing with no prior warnings. The series of execution against civilians in Gaza is continuing, and no one has the right to apply these mass executions in Gaza.
The United Nations on Friday described talk of a safe zone in southern Gaza as a farce in its strongest statement yet on the Strip's humanitarian crisis. UNICEF spokesperson James Elder said there is no safe place for Palestinians displaced from Gaza City, adding that areas designated by Israel are places of death, with schools and tents turned to rubble. The organizers of the global Sumud Flotilla said Israeli forces intercepted the boat Marinette on Friday morning about 42.5 nautical miles off Gaza. They confirmed that all 42 boats in the flotilla carrying humanitarian aid and volunteers have now been seized. Hebrew media reported that the last vessel was taken to Ashdod port and its passengers detained. The Palestinian Justice Lawyers Organization said Israeli authorities have begun prosecuting global Sumud Flotilla participants after transferring them from Ashdod port to Ketziot prison in the Naqab region. It reported that trial sessions begun without notifying defense lawyers and pledged to monitor the fate of each detainee through prison visits.
Participants in the global Sumud Flotilla were transferred from Ashdod to Ketziot prison in the Negev, and special court sessions began without notifying the legal team. These sessions were conducted entirely without legal representation. Lawyers are now present at the special court sessions, where detention orders are being reviewed. The participants' rights have been systematically violated throughout this process. In addition to being denied access to water, restrooms, and medication, they were also deprived of access to lawyers, violating their fundamental rights to due process, a fair trial, and legal representation. Several participants reported being subjected to assault, threats, and harassment, including being violently woken up whenever they tried to sleep.
Meanwhile, the occupation authorities continue to detain activists who took part in the Sumud Flotilla, which was seized by Israeli forces before reaching the shores of Gaza. Hebrew media reported that on Friday, the occupation authorities are expected to begin deporting around 470 activists by plane to a European country, while others will be deported through the Karama crossing into Jordan or on commercial flights. Hamas said the raid by fascist Ben Gvir on the detention site of international activists from the global Sumud Flotilla in his attempt to threaten and humiliate them reflects the arrogance and moral and political decay of the Zionist leadership. In a statement, Hamas stressed that Ben Gvir's labeling of the activists as terrorists merely for trying to deliver milk and food to Gaza's children demands global condemnation and pressure on the entity to release them immediately.
The raid carried out by the fascist Ben Gvir on the place where the international activists from global Sumud Flotilla are being held, and his attempt to threaten and humiliate them reflect the extent of arrogance and moral and political degradation reached by the leaders of the criminal Zionist entity, an attempt in vain to appear victorious over unarmed activists, at a time when his fascist entity is facing global isolation. His description of these activists as terrorists, merely for seeking to deliver milk and food supplies to our children and our people in Gaza, who are subjected to systemic genocide and starvation, calls for global and urgent condemnation of him and of the conduct of his fascist army against our defenseless people, and for pressure on the entity to immediately release them.
Far-right Israeli minister Ben Gvir stormed the prison, holding global Sumud Flotilla activists, calling them terrorists, a move seen as another sign of the political and moral decline of Israeli officials as they trample international law amid the ongoing genocide. Osama Ayadi has more details in the following report.
As soon as the activists of the Sumud Flotilla had reached their detention centers, the Minister of National Security of the Zionist government, Ben Gvir, quickly appeared, accusing him of terrorism. This is a habit Ben Gvir has preserved, as he is accustomed to shouting into the air, empowering detainees and prisoners. The attempt to humiliate the activists lasted only seconds. Even if the attempt to act failed them, they chanted freedom for Palestine. This is yet another episode of the series of genocide and trampling on the law, which was met with widespread condemnation from the international and human rights community, which had previously denounced the Zionist naval forces' interception of the ships of the global Sumud Flotilla in international waters. One of the crew members of the Global Aid Flotilla, who were on the summertime boat and changed course for the fear of hijacking, denounced the Zionist acts and affirmed that the law must take its course because no one is above the law and no one has the right to be a pirate at sea.
This act is an act of solidarity, so we can be together if anybody is attacked, and we have to obey the law, and nobody's above the law. Nobody have the right to be a pirate of the sea and enforce whatever they want to do, and I think we are equal. We are doing things legally. We're not violating international law. We came to Larnaca within the law of the Larnaca and the Cyprus Authority. We're obeying European law, international law. We are doing everything legal, nothing illegal. And in fact, everything that illegal that's been done against us was done in high seas in international water, and we were kidnapped.
Despite the fact that the Sumud Flotilla and other previous initiatives were on the verge of reaching the shores of the Gaza Strip and were violated by the Zionist forces, in fact, they reached the heart of the Strip, which has been under siege for nearly 2 years. Though their languages, colors, and nationalities may be diverse, their idea is one. A 1,000-mile journey to break the siege begins with one step.
The United Nations called for respect of international maritime law following the Israeli attack on the global Sumud Flotilla, which was heading to the Gaza Strip to break the blockade. Deputy spokesman for the UN Secretary General Farhan Haq expressed hope during the daily press briefing that participants in the flotilla would not be harmed and that they would be treated in a manner that respects their rights and dignity. And youth from the Gen Z movement staged mass protests in Casablanca's United Nations Square, demanding the resignation of Moroccan Prime Minister Aziz Akhannouch over the government's failure to address reforms in education, healthcare, and corruption. Media reports said police dispersed the demonstrations and cracked down on sit-ins where protesters chanted against Akhannouch and corruption. The protests coincided with the Moroccan Council of Governments' first meeting on dialogue with youth in public space and institutions. The European Union on Friday called on all parties in Morocco to maintain calm amid the widespread social movement shaking the country in protest against marginalization and deterioration of health and education services. European Commission spokesperson Anwar Al-Anouni emphasized in a press statement the importance of youth participation in public life, expressing solidarity with the families of the victims.
We recognize the importance of youth participation in public life in Morocco, and we call on all concerned parties to remain calm. We regret the acts of violence committed during the recent demonstrations and extend our heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims.
More than 15 international humanitarian rights groups condemned the repression by Makhzen forces against peaceful protesters and the judiciary's threats of heavy prison terms for detainees, possibly up to life sentences. In a joint statement, the organizations said the event in Morocco were not isolated violations but a full-fledged political crime, and a systematic policy denying citizens their constitutional rights to free expression and peaceful assembly while using excessive force to disperse them.
We express our condemnation of the full-fledged crime committed by the Makhzan and of the escalating repression carried out by the Moroccan authorities against the peaceful protests witnessed in several cities across the country. What occurred was not merely limited violations, but rather a systemic policy that deprived citizens of exercising their rights to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. In this policy, security forces used excessive and disproportionate force to disperse the demonstrations called for by youth through digital platforms.
And the organization said the event marked a clear breach of Morocco's constitutional and international commitments, stressing that protesters were peaceful and demanded education, healthcare, and an end to normalization.
What happened represents a clear violation of Morocco's international obligations. We call on the authorities to immediately release and to end the policy of repression that threatens citizens' right to civil participation. The security campaign against peaceful demonstrators who took to the streets to demand the right to education and health and to call for ending normalization with the Zionist entity must come to an end.
In other news, at the 22nd Africa-Nordic Foreign Ministers meeting in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe, participants stressed the urgent need to reform the UN Security Council to secure fair and permanent representation for Africa. Algeria's foreign ministry said the meeting was co-chaired by Salma Bakhta Mansouri, Algeria's Secretary of State for African Affairs, and Norway's Foreign Minister Espen Barth Eide. A special session on multilateralism underscored ending Africa's historical exclusion and completing its decolonization process.
During the 22nd ministerial meeting between Africa and the Nordic countries held in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe, participants reaffirmed that reforming the United Nations Security Council is an urgent priority to ensure fair and lasting representation for Africa and to address the historical exclusion the continent has faced, including the completion of the decolonization process in Africa.
The meeting also underscored the importance of implementing the UN Security Council resolution on financing African Union-led peace operations, according to a statement from Algeria's foreign ministry.
The meeting also underscored the importance of implementing United Nations Security Council Resolution 2719 on the financing of African Union-led peace operations. Participants emphasized the need for partners, particularly the Nordic countries, to support efforts to make this resolution an effective tool for strengthening the principle of complementarity between the African Union and the United Nations, and for promoting African solutions to African problems.
Moving on now to Sudan, the Resistance Committee's coordination in El Fasher fighting alongside the army said the city has turned into an open morgue, bleeding from all sides since dawn. In a statement Friday, the group accused the Rapid Support Forces of imposing intense and deliberate bombardment on the besieged city, indiscriminately targeting homes, markets, hospitals, and even shelters, the last refuge for displaced residents.
Al-Fasher has become an open mortuary bleeding from all directions. Since the early hours of dawn, the city has been subjected to deliberate, intense, and indiscriminate shelling targeting everything: homes, markets, hospitals, and even shelters, which were the last refuge for the displaced and homeless. Shells are raining down like waters, sparing no one, not a sleeping child, nor a mother pleading to the heavens to protect her children. The stench of death fills the streets, blood washes over the pavements. Homes have been destroyed with their residents inside, markets have been reduced to ashes, bodies are being pulled from under the rubble, nameless and faceless, mere numbers in a long record of massacres.
The Sudanese army announced that its forces launched what it described as a large-scale attack on positions held by the Rapid Support Forces in Nyala, the capital of South Darfur in western Sudan. Army sources told Al24 News that Sudanese Air Force strikes destroyed 3 main RSF training camps in the areas of Dumayya, Bulbul, and Thuluj, south of Nyala. Our sources also reported that the operation left dozens dead, including 17 foreign mercenaries who had been overseeing training operations. The Joint Force of Sudanese Armed Struggle Movements reaffirmed its commitment to continue fighting until Sudan is fully reclaimed, stressing that the path is full of challenges, but will not deter it from pursuing the road of dignity. In a statement on Friday, the Joint Force said that the blood of the martyrs shed on the homeland soil serves as fuel that strengthens the fighters' determination to achieve victory, emphasizing that there will or shall not be broken, nor will they retreat, no matter how long the road or how great the sacrifices. The United Nations Human Rights Council is expected to vote next week on a draft resolution calling for a ceasefire in Sudan and the establishment of an independent international monitoring mechanism to ensure its implementation. Media sources reported on Friday that the initial draft of the resolution described the violations committed against civilians during the war ongoing since mid-April 2023 as war crimes warranted referral to the International Criminal Court. It added that the draft includes provisions for holding those responsible accountable, classifying the acts as war crimes and crimes against humanity. And the Ukrainian Ministry of Energy said on Friday that Russia launched a massive overnight attack with drones and missiles on several regions of Ukraine, mainly targeting energy infrastructure. For its part, DTEK Group, Ukraine's largest private energy services company, announced the suspension of operations at several gas facilities in the Poltava region. Media sources reported Russia launched 381 drones and 35 missiles during the operation, striking energy infrastructure in the eastern Kharkiv region and central Poltava, home to Ukraine's key gas production facilities. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that recent drone incursions into Europe show Russia is seeking escalation, urging Europeans to stand firmly with Ukraine. Speaking at an informal European summit in Copenhagen, Zelensky said Moscow's strategy is simply to divide Europe, stressing that the response must be the exact opposite. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced that its forces captured the town of Verbov in Dnipropetrovsk region in less than a week. The ministry released a video showcasing clashes around the town and Russian troops raising their flags and taking control of it. In a statement on Friday, the ministry also said its air defense systems destroyed 20 Ukrainian drones overnight over Crimea, the Voronezh, Belgorod, and Kursk regions, as well as the Black Sea. And French Prime Minister-designate Sébastien Lecornu is struggling to form a government more than 3 weeks after his appointment. He's holding fresh consultations with political parties, but most have taken a firm stance, refusing to give him a blank check. Marwa Blauer with more details.
France is stuck in political limbo. It's been over 3 weeks since Sébastien Lecornu was asked to form a new government, and he's still nowhere near the finish line. 3 rounds of protests later, the pressure is building up, and the political deadlock is unlike anything the Fifth Republic has seen before. Getting the parties on board has been a nightmare. The right-wing Republicans led by Bruno Retailleau warned that joining the government isn't a blank check. The left, meanwhile, threatened to bring down Lecornu's cabinet before it even takes shape.
I'm telling you, he has broken the record for the longest time taken to form a government.
We're proposing another record for being the shortest-serving Prime Minister of the Fifth Republic. We will get rid of him next week. Yes, we intend to use a no-confidence motion to dismiss Mr. Lecornu, the only man in France who has served in every Macron government over the past 8 years.
With unions and political opponents closing in, Lecornu tried to calm the waters, promising not to use Article 49.3, the constitutional shortcut that lets governments pass laws without a vote. But critics say that pledge clashes with his austerity plans, which they argue favor the wealthy over ordinary citizens.
Nous venons tout simplement demander au Premier ministre.
We simply came to ask the Prime Minister whether there is any trick or trap behind the scrapping of Article 49.3. Its absence in the state budget and in the social security budget should allow MPs to submit amendments. If MPs cannot propose amendments to repeal or suspend the pension reform or to raise pensions, then it's purely fantasy, and we will not accept it.
For 22 days, Lecornu has been stuck in negotiations trying to stitch together even a slim majority. But with every party setting its own terms, including Macron's allies, it's obvious that political players are already focused on 2027. And if history repeats itself, Lecornu's government might end up short-lived as François Bayroul's.
And that's a wrap for tonight's program. Thanks for following, and bye-bye.